Leon Crane hit the snow so hard it swallowed him to the hips. Above him, the B-24 came down into the Alaskan mountain in a burst of wreckage and burning fuel. A moment earlier, he had been inside it, strapped into a bomber that was spinning out of control at high altitude, while the crew fought the instruments and the frozen sky. Now the plane was gone. The engine noise had stopped. The men who had been beside him were gone with it. Crane stood in the winter silence with his parachute dragging behind him, his hands and face stinging from the cold, and called out for the others until his voice disappeared into the trees. It was December 21st, 1943, and Lieutenant Leon Crane was stationed at Ladd Field near Fairbanks during World War II. He was an Army Air Forces officer, young, trained, and used to danger in the controlled way that pilots had to be. Alaska was a place of brutal distances, sudden weather, mountains, rivers, and cold that could kill a man who made one bad decision. That morning, Crane had gone up on what was supposed to be a routine high-altitude test flight over the interior in a B-24 Liberator. There were 5 men aboard. Lieutenant Harold Hoskins was the pilot. Crane was the co-pilot. With them were Lieutenant James Seibert, Sergeant Ralph Wenz, and Master Sergeant Richard Pompeo. At about 25,000 feet, one of the 4 engines failed. The aircraft began to lose control. Crane and Hoskins fought the bomber, but the spin tightened. The crew radioed trouble, but they could not give a useful location. The plane dropped into a dive they could not recover from. Crane got into his parachute and moved toward the open bomb bay. The cold struck him the moment he went out. Wind tore at his face. The mountains and trees came up beneath him, and the crippled bomber fell away. He later remembered seeing the red flame of the crash when the B-24 hit the mountainside overlooking the Charlie River, in what is now Yukon-Charlie Rivers National Preserve. When Crane landed, he was alive, but survival had only begun. The temperature was around 40 below zero. He had no food. He had no sleeping bag. The crash had destroyed the supplies that might have kept him alive. He had 2 packs of matches, a Boy Scout knife, and the silk parachute that had saved him. His uniform was not enough for that country. His hands and feet were already in danger. He shouted for Hoskins and the others. No one answered. He did not know whether any of them had escaped the plane. He did not know where he was. He only knew that standing still would kill him. So he wrapped himself in the parachute and began moving down toward the river below. The snow was deep, and every step stole strength. The cold worked through his boots, gloves, and clothes, turning pain into numbness. For 9 days, Crane stayed near an improvised camp under a spruce tree. He built fires with his limited matches and used his parachute like a sleeping bag. The cold woke him over and over. He had to unwrap himself, gather wood, rebuild the fire, and wrap himself again before he could sleep for another short stretch. Food became a thought he could not escape. He tried to kill squirrels with weapons he made by hand, but the animals stayed out of reach. For those days he lived on water, and his strength was running thin. He understood that rescue might not come. The crew had gone down in remote wilderness, with no clear location sent by radio. Snow could cover wreckage. Weather could ground aircraft. If Crane waited too long, weakness would trap him beneath the same tree until the cold finished the job. He had to move. He followed the Charlie River north through deep snow, using the frozen waterway as a guide because the river had to lead somewhere. The travel was slow and punishing. His legs sank, his lungs burned in the cold, his fingers and feet were frostbitten. The white landscape gave him no comfort and few landmarks. Each day required the same decision: keep walking or stop. Then he found a cabin. It stood snow-covered and empty, with an elevated cache nearby. Inside and around it were supplies left by a trapper and miner named Phil Burrell, part of a chain of cabins used by people who worked the Charlie River country. Crane found food, sugar, powdered milk, canned goods, a rifle, a frying pan, canvas, and moose-hide mittens. Soon, he had heat from the stove and something warm to drink. The cabin did not end the ordeal, but it gave him time. He ate. He warmed his hands and feet. He tried to regain strength. He was still lost. No one at Ladd Field knew he was alive. The cabin had bought him days, then weeks, but it could become a trap if he waited too long. Crane stayed through January, recovering enough to think beyond the next fire. Outside, Alaska remained locked in winter. Snowstorms came through. Wind pressed against the cabin. The river was the only road he had, but it was dangerous even when frozen. He knew that civilization had to be downstream. Leaving meant giving up the one safe place he had found. In early February, he made the choice. He built a sled and tried to haul food and supplies with him, but it was too heavy and awkward in the snow. He abandoned what he could not carry and pushed on. Sometimes he found game and shot ptarmigan. Sometimes he broke through thin ice and had to dry his clothes before the cold could turn wet fabric into a death sentence. The river led him through spruce, rock, snow, and silence. He moved when he could, rested when he had to, and followed the frozen path north. Days blurred together. Crane's beard grew thick. His clothes tore and blackened from smoke, dirt, and use. His body changed into the shape of the ordeal. He was a man moving through wilderness by instinct, rationing strength, watching the weather, and listening for any sign that he was near other people. At last, he found a sled trail. It meant someone used this country. It meant a cabin, a trapline, a family, or a camp might be close. Crane followed it and reached the homestead of trapper Albert Ames and his family. After 84 days in the Alaskan winter, Leon Crane had found help. The Ames family saw a man who looked as if he had walked out of another world. Crane later described seeing himself in a mirror with a black beard, long matted hair, wind-burned skin, and dark circles around his eyes. They fed him pancakes and moose steak. He rested there for 2 days, then traveled by dog team with Ames to the Woodchopper mining camp along the Yukon River. From there, word went out that a missing Army airman was alive. Back at Ladd Field, the news sounded impossible. The B-24 had vanished in December. The men aboard had been presumed lost. Then came the message that Crane was not only alive, but on his way back. On March 14, 1944, a plane brought him into Fairbanks. Officers rushed to see him. He was dirty, torn, and worn down, but he was walking. Crane called his family to tell them he was alive. Then, instead of leaving the disaster behind, he helped lead the effort to find the crash site and recover the others. In October of 1944, a recovery team reached the wreckage and found the remains of Lieutenant James Seibert and Sergeant Ralph Wentz. No evidence was found then of Harold Hoskins or Richard Pompeo. Decades later, in 2006, a team searching the site found remains believed to be Hoskins, and he was later buried with military honors at Arlington National Cemetery. Pompeo's remains were not recovered. Crane had survived because he moved when movement was the only choice, stayed when shelter was the only hope, and left shelter when waiting became its own danger. He had not conquered Alaska. No one did. He had endured it long enough to find another human being. Leon Crane lived for decades after the war and died in 2002, but the center of his life remained those 84 days between the crash and the cabin door at the Ames homestead. A young pilot fell out of the sky into one of the coldest places in North America with almost nothing. 4 men from his crew never came home. Crane walked out alive, changed by the wilderness, carrying a story so unlikely that the men at Ladd Field had to see him with their own eyes before they could believe it. Thank you for listening to Horrifying Survival Stories. Subscribe for more stories of those who faced the impossible and lived.